and I won't get into politics. We need something gentle. So anyway, after Ethereum came out, then we started to see, not that long after, lots of other blockchain projects beginning to blossom, and very, very quickly, blockchain became a big buzzword, and it's become exactly what happened to the web, which is overhyped.
Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Mike Brunt, sometimes known as the CF Whisperer, and he has been doing ColdFusion since version 1, and he's an expert at tuning ColdFusion web servers, and he's done it for many large organizations around the world. And what you may not know about Mike, he's also a music composer and a musician and a painter and a permaculture gardener, I guess the right phrase is for that. So... he's a world traveler because he grew up in England and been in Los Angeles, New Zealand. Now he's in Eugene, Oregon. So welcome, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks as always, for having me on. Although in Britain, when you say having me on, it means you're pulling somebody's leg, but that's another story.
No, we won't do too much leg pulling, I'm sure.
Right.
But we are going to be talking about ColdFusion and the blockchain revolution. So I'm sure many people listening have heard about Bitcoin and various other blockchain projects, but how can we interact with them using ColdFusion? And, why should that matter to ColdFusion developers? And why ColdFusion is the best language to do this in? And some of the blockchain projects that Mike is currently working on, we'll talk about, as well as using the ColdFusion API manager to make things easier for all this. And if we get time, we will wrap a bit about blockchain versus the GDPR European approach to privacy. Mm-hmm. I think you might have some controversial views there, Mike.
Never.
So, and we'll also, if we have time, talk about blockchain evolution and how that compares to the web development evolution that ColdFusion was part of back around the late 90s or 2000. So let's start off with, just in case anyone listening doesn't know what the blockchain is, can you just succinctly tell us what is the blockchain?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying when I started to become involved. I started to become involved when Ethereum came out. Ethereum really is still the second biggest name in the blockchain cryptocurrency world. Bitcoin's still out there in front, even though people have criticized it from here to eternity one way or another. And I'd like to dispel some of those myths too. But so Bitcoin was the first use of blockchain technology. And another term for blockchain technology, which is probably more accurate nowadays, is distributed ledger technology, or DLT. And the reason that it's probably more succinct is because there are chains out there that aren't blockchains. And I'll talk about one of those too as we're going along. But anyway, the first implementation of what we now know as blockchain technology was Bitcoin. Bitcoin came out in 2009, I think it was, as an answer to the financial crisis and debacle that happened in 2008. And it was expressly written as a value exchange mechanism that was decentralized. And working in a peer-to-peer manner. That's really the core of what Bitcoin was. If you ever read the white paper, Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper, it's very explicit about that. Just as a side comment, what's happened to Bitcoin, sadly, is that it's become a speculation mechanism, and that was never the intention. It was really never the intention for it to have a US dollar value or any other currency value, but that's what's happened to it. And, that's a whole subject in its own right. But so Bitcoin was the first, and all you could use blockchain for at that time, it was Bitcoin. So nobody really knew that blockchain existed, to be honest with you. Then out came Ethereum. What Ethereum did, they started, this just came to me as I'm talking, they started a revolution in exactly the same way that LA did with ColdFusion. Because they opened up what was a relatively difficult world to do things in and made it much easier. So the root of Ethereum, which is the first time I became aware of blockchain, is that you can write apps, or DAPs as they're called, for the blockchain. Before that, you couldn't really do that unless you were, maybe some PhDs somewhere, top flight computer scientists had done it, but for the average developers, you couldn't do that. So Ethereum really opened up the blockchain world more than anything else has, and opened the floodgates for it. And I started to get involved, and I'll tell you why I started to get involved. At the time, you mentioned permaculture, which is another one of my worlds. And at the time, I was looking for a value exchange mechanism for permaculture as a universal concept, a worldwide concept, because permaculture is pretty much everywhere. I'm sure you find it where you are, Michaela, or wherever you go.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think traditional farming is kind of a bit more permanent, doesn't use chemicals.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Pesticides, what have you.
Yeah, I have a good, not to go off at tangents, but I have a good friend whose mother lives in Peru, and is Peruvian. So, and that's another nice little story. You might, like this. She brought some seeds with her the last time she came. There were moringa and loofah, neither of which typically would grow here, but I've got them growing in the greenhouse at the moment. But that's another story. So I was looking around for a value exchange mechanism so that we could, quite frankly, we could get beyond governments using permaculture. That was my plan, because I see permaculture as a very gentle revolution. And when you look around at some of the people running some of the countries, and I won't get into politics, we need something gentle. So anyway, after Ethereum came out, then we started to see, not that long after, lots of other blockchain projects beginning to blossom, and very, very quickly, blockchain became a big buzzword, and it's become exactly what happened to the web, which is overhyped. That's not to say it doesn't have uses. It does. It has many uses, but it's just in a state of complete hype at the moment, and it's made a situation that existed even worse. And that situation is the lack of developers. It was like a sponge sucking up. Everybody wanted to be a blockchain developer. So it's just made that situation worse. And then, of course, on another side, we had the H-1B problem, where we ran out of H-1B visa early in 2018, right through the end of 2019. So lots of agony going on at the moment. Sorry about that. Did you come through on the sound there?
No. I heard all you're saying. So.
Oh, good. Sorry. I'll apologise. Somebody tried to call me on Skype. So yeah. Anyway, like I said, lots of hype going on. There's like, as far as I can see, way into the future, there'll be a lack of developers. So it's a difficult situation, and I'll tell you how and why I can relate to that. I'm working on 2 blockchain projects, and in both cases, we just can't find. I mean, in one case, there was a company in India that were contracted, and they didn't deliver on time several times. And then just generally finding developers is difficult. In fact,
you may have to break down and just learn how to do it yourself, Mike.
Yeah, well, the thing is that I do like to, if I'm talking about something, I do like to be able to look at it and know what it is. Basically, I am becoming familiar with it. There's something else, that I really wanted to touch on, which is, sorry, I just need to type twice on Skype and it cuts into my audio. So it is an issue with development, but I will talk about something here, which is what languages are used for blockchain projects. So when Ethereum started their own language called Solidity, which looks a lot like JavaScript or ECMAScript. Blockchain itself, I believe, Bitcoin itself is C++, I believe. But what we're starting to see now, which I touched on, I think when we were talking before the interview started, is we're starting to see traditional languages being used more in blockchain projects. I mean, certainly JavaScript is there quite heavily. There's a Google language that gets used quite a bit. It's called Go or Golang. Now I'm beginning to see Java used more and more. Like I mentioned, there's C++ in there. So a lot of the familiar languages are there. So it's not going to be tremendously unfamiliar territory. The biggest difference, really, what blockchain is, it's actually more like a network level protocol than a language, because we're still moving data. We're still moving data around. We're still storing data somewhere. That's something else I'll touch on shortly. We're still playing around with ones and zeros. So it's just a different way of dealing with all those things. And I touched on part of it before, which is distributed ledger technology. And if we think about what ledgers were before computers, that gives us a good idea of what it really is. It's a store of data, basically, of transactions. And most of them, if not all of them, are immutable, which means nothing can be deleted. And an classic example of that, if you go looking for it, you'll see the famous Bitcoin transaction, which was a large pizza. It might have been 2 large pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. That's still there. You can still see it. And I think you were going to say something, Michaela, then.
Yeah, I was just going to dig down onto that. The blockchain is distributed ledger technology. So, what traditionally banks and governments and other large organizations have done is had centralized ledgers.
Right.
If you do transactions with your bank, you write a check, or you withdraw from an ATM, or you receive a payment via direct debit or whatever. All of those go into an enormous central database. Either it's running Oracle, or goodness knows what, might even be DB2, or might be some custom written database, that isn't even a whatever. And so what these blockchains are doing, they're performing the same function of being able to store accurately transactions and not let the old transactions be corrupted by evil people. But they're doing it distributed potentially over thousands or millions of machines or servers.
Yeah.
And there is no centralized server that could be either turned off if someone didn't like if someone doesn't like Bitcoin, it can't be turned off.
No, can't be turned off.
And it's a bit similar to the situation, and if you remember Napster.
Oh, absolutely, I do.
Yeah, which was a music sharing service, and they had a centralized server. And then, I think the US government said, well, we're not having this because there were copyright violations. So they shut down their centralized server, and there went the service. And that, of course, was replaced by a lot of peer-to-peer services where there is no centralized server. So there's an echo of blockchain back to music peer-to-peer.
Absolutely. Yeah, LimeWire and all those things. I mean, that's why there's a lot. It's a very interesting situation. All you said is true. Definitely disintermediation is the rather long word which describes what blockchain and other chains can do, which is to remove the need for centralization. Now, one of the this is where Bitcoin has gone a bit off the rails. Because there are exchanges, which is where you buy and sell Bitcoin in essence for other currencies. So that's introduced a slight amount of centralization to it. So that's and most of the problems that have happened with Bitcoin, with people losing money or being ripped off, has happened in an exchange, not in Bitcoin itself.
Or someone left their private key lying around, and someone snagged it.
Well, that too, and then there's another version of that, which is people lose a hard drive and they lose all the Bitcoin.
Yeah, I know someone who that happened to. They had their Bitcoin back when Bitcoins were less than $1 each, and they're like, "Oh, this doesn't really matter." They didn't pay attention. They kind of regretted it afterwards.
Slightly.
Yeah, because Bitcoins are roughly whatever 7,000 or 8,000.
Yeah, about 7,000, I think, the last time I looked. People often ask me, "What do you know about this? Don't you regret that you didn't buy any?" I said, "No, I don't. I enjoy this technology." There's too much suffering goes on in this world for people wishing they had done something. It's not worth going down that road, I don't think. I'm happy enough in my life, but that's another story. But I do want to go back to two basic concepts of blockchain. You've touched on them as well. The most important single concept is peer-to-peer. That's really the core of what proper blockchain projects should be. The second classification, or it's really two classifications, is there are two kinds of blockchain or distributed ledger technologies. There's permissioned and permissionless. So Ethereum, Bitcoin, and a lot of others are permissionless. What that means is anybody can join. Anybody can become part of the blockchain. They don't have to be approved. And it's, they were built so that they're self-governing, basically. And that's why you've got this concept of, many different systems and they've all got to agree, or a number of them have got to agree, and so on. So that's permissionless. Permission blockchains, which is where the real growth is going on at the moment, because that's very interesting to business. Is a blockchain which you have to be invited into, or you have to be allowed into. And I mentioned before the Hyperledger project. I can't remember whether I was talking to you before. I mentioned it. I think it was before.
It was before we hit record.
Right.
So Hyperledger is an open source blockchain that you're looking at.
Yeah, it's a grouping of blockchains in actual fact. To mention some of them, there's Sawtooth, there's Indy, there's a number of them anyway. It's the Linux Foundation, and definitely worthy of looking at, because that's a very stable. There's some real. I read something today that said 70%. This is another subject. 70% of ICOs are fraudulent, and an ICO is an initial coin offering. One that we touched on before the call, which is EOS. That's EOS, raised $4 billion in an ICO. And about 2 weeks later, they were in all sorts of technical troubles, which they've since resolved. Anyway, that's a different subject. But that's a reflection of the hype. But just to repeat myself, Hyperledger, which is the Linux Foundation, they're all open source projects. You can download if you want to start playing around with blockchain projects. You can go to any of their projects and download code. I've already done that. I've had a couple of them running here in my lab. So it's a much more, it's a typical open source, community. People are in it to help each other, and so on and so forth. And the person that's running the Hyperledger project, he's the one that really managed Apache as a web server project, and then as an open source project too.
So do you have to apply to join one of these Hyperledger blockchains, or?
Well, you would if it was, let's say you were working for a company and they decided to use one of those blockchains, then you would have to be approved to go in there. But if you just want to download the code and play around with it, it's really simple. You just go there, fill in a form and download the code and install it. And, it's just doing that, just installing it more than anything else is really informative. It gives you a really good idea of what blockchains are and what you can do with them.
So what do you see the advantage of using a permissioned blockchain?
Because a lot of businesses don't want permissionless constructs inside the business, basically. I mean, almost as soon as I was around, just like I was, very similar to this part's very similar to ColdFusion. I was around really when Hyperledger got started, more or less. And they only had one project in their roster at that time, which had been donated by IBM. And then, so I got interested then, and then as I watched, they ended up. I think they've got 13 now that are in there with them. So it grew very quickly because there was a very great interest from the business community in particular, and also financial institutions, which really are part of the business community anyway. There's just a lot of interest there. So if I was to recommend someone from a development standpoint to look at blockchain type projects, I'm repeating myself, Hyperledger is a good one to look at because you can get, like I say, you can get right at the code, and there's a lot of it around. There's a lot of companies moving towards using it. So I actually run, just out of interest, I run the Eugene Hyperledger meetup group, for those reasons. And, I want to bring, because a lot of people are looking for developers, and Eugene, Oregon happens to be a hotbed of, there's a lot of investment going into technology, and there's talk of it becoming the second Silicon Valley. I don't know whether that will happen or not, but that's what's being said.
It could be the blockchain valley, right?
Well, I'd like it to be the blockchain valley. Yeah, that's why I started that group. It's nice to be. It's exciting, I mean. Yeah, I hope I won't get censured for saying this, but I'm 70 years old. I should have retired 5 years ago. I have no bloody intention of retiring because it's too exciting. It's too much fun, I'll use this analogy because it's a true one. When I first stumbled upon blockchain, it was like when I first stumbled upon ColdFusion. All sorts of lights went off in my head, and the story. One of the first. My blog is CF Whisperer. One of the first blog posts I did is a story of how I got into ColdFusion, which to me is interesting anyway. But it's very similar. I mean, the analogies between blockchain and the web are tremendously similar. Because the web became overhyped. We all saw that. In fact, to be quite honest, ColdFusion itself got inflated to a ridiculous degree by the hype that surrounded the web, and then of course all of a sudden the dot-com bubble burst. And I was actually in Newton, Massachusetts, which is where LA's headquarters were. Eventually, they had at that point they had 600 employees. Beautiful building, and I was actually in there working for LA at the time when they announced. We're all sat around this table and said we have an announcement to make. We're being acquired, and they said we're just going to tell you that, of course, to wind us up, the name begins with an M. So of course you know what everybody thought, but of course it was Macromedia. But that story has its own aside too for anybody wanting to look at it. Jeremy Allaire has a blog post somewhere or an interview where he speaks about Microsoft trying to buy Allaire, or at least making overtures years ago. And according to what he says in his interview, he and JJ were having too much fun. But then Microsoft went out and bought a company in Hawaii, and that's where ASP came from.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of a, if Microsoft had, it's kind of interesting thought experiment. Where would ColdFusion be if Microsoft had bought it? I guess you can look at where ASP is now. Well, ASP doesn't really exist, but .NET still exists.
Right.
So I don't know if ColdFusion as we know it would still be around. Or
well, there's a lot. As the saying goes, we could write a book, couldn't we? I mean, I remember I was with Allaire when, not to go on too long about this, but when they acquired Live Software, which is where JRun came from. So I started looking at JRun and I thought, hang on a minute, this does a lot of the same things that ColdFusion does, except it's in Java. Well, of course, they bought it with the thought of porting ColdFusion to Java, which they eventually did. But, there's another bit of history too, when we get back on subject. The first Java-based ColdFusion engine was Blue Dragon. It was there before JRun. So, that's another part of this wonderful story. So what I'll do now, if I may, is let's get into more specific about ColdFusion and blockchain and where that might go. So the first thing is all blockchains I have come across, or all chains, as I mentioned, there's some that aren't blockchains, have an API. And that API is usually REST based. So ColdFusion, and you just call it ColdFusion in its own right, can, as we all know, can correspond via REST interfaces. If we go up a step in terms of manageability and securing, API Manager, which came out with ColdFusion 2016, gives us a way to really get granular about how we consume, produce, manage and secure REST, APIs generally. And really, the API situation is quite revolutionary in ways, because it's what's enabling a lot of, now that we've got beyond SOAP, because SOAP wasn't a particularly performant API version, REST is much better. And of course, it's been used across all sorts of industries to cross-communicate. So that's one way that ColdFusion is of great relevance, in my opinion, to blockchain projects. The other reason is this, the blockchains are there, blockchains, distributed ledger technology is better, are there to contain, manage, and give up data. I mean, that's what's, as I mentioned earlier on, that's what's in there is data, transactions, all sorts of any identification data, anything that you would normally see in a database, in actual fact, is typically in a blockchain. But it is a dirty secret or clean secret. Almost all the data in the world is still in databases. It's not in blockchains. So there's still a lot of, there's this concept of what's called oracles, and it's not Oracle, the database, funnily enough, as we're talking databases. Oracles are these things that sit between blockchain projects and legacy data. And ColdFusion is absolutely beautifully positioned to fill that role, at the very least, because it's still, to this day, there's still no other language. I defy anybody to tell me another language which makes manipulation of SQL any easier.
And working with APIs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's I will just divert a little bit off the subject for a minute, but it is about ColdFusion, and it's interesting and good news. So Lewis Mahano and Brad Wood and the team there at Otis are doing. They're doing such a wonderful job for CFML and ColdFusion, with command box. I have a couple of clients now who are using command box, and I'd not been exposed to it before, and I hadn't taken the time to learn it. And it's pretty revolutionary in terms of how easy it is to spin up instances and many other things.
I would say it's beyond revolutionary. You just put in the command and then you've got a new instance of any version of ColdFusion or Lucy CFML. So
exactly. Yeah.
There's no installing it or other messing around. And also, of course, as you know, it's a command line interpreter for ColdFusion. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. The good news, you may know this already, Michaela, but the good news is that it's now officially supported by Adobe. If you've got an Adobe support plan, then they will support command box.
Wow.
I learned about that and had it confirmed 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that's good news. And not to miss another accolade here. I mean, I am beyond grateful to Adobe for the support they've given to ColdFusion, and they continue to give to ColdFusion. They are the only company after Alaire, or except Alaire, who actually have a dedicated ColdFusion conference. The company supporting it, I'm talking about, that own it. I mean, you had, I know you had great conferences, but I'm talking about, Macromedia never had a dedicated ColdFusion conference,
No, they had DevCon.
Right.
I think was what they called it, which was all their development languages. So right. Yeah, you're talking about CF Summit, which we'll talk about more at the end of the episode,
right,
Mike. But
yeah, I appreciate Adobe anyway for that, and they're such a great team too. I mean, if we've got the Adobe team and Otis between them, we should be blazing trails like nobody bloody knows.
Well, I think we are blazing trails.
Well, we are. But the thing is, what gets to me a bit is that one of ColdFusion's strengths is also used often as a criticism, and the fact that it's been around so long, that's not the bloody weakness. You know, and you know, there's a certain, I think among developers, I've seen this. I've seen so many development teams, because I typically have 6 or 7 clients at any one time. So I've seen so many development teams, and if I had a criticism for the mindset, it's fashion. Well, fashion or religion, one or the other, you know, and not either of them related to fashion or religion, related to software. And you know, ColdFusion has had difficulty being fashionable, and there's no good reason for that. And you know, there's a famous blog piece that I was involved in writing, which was you know, about the Indy 500, and the fact that somebody, it's a long story which I won't go into, but we had to move the servers for the Indy 500 3 weeks before the Indy 500 was occurring, and that's a dreadful punishment for servers that particular weekend. And thanks to the flexibility of ColdFusion, we were able to get it done in time. If it had been any other language, we'd probably have still been trying to get it done next year. And I can give you an exact example. We had a healthcare client that was using ColdFusion, and here we go, religion. Somebody came in and said, "Oh, we're going to move that to .NET, and we'll be done in what's your timeline?" Well, we won't need you in 9 months' time. Okay, 2.5 years later, they were still trying to move to .NET. You know, so one little bit of caution I would give to anybody out there that's listening to this: think many times before you move to a different language, because there's typically not enough benefit in it. And certainly moving away from ColdFusion, I can tell you now, there isn't enough benefit in it. So,
I'd say it's the opposite of benefit. Usually you end up with something that's harder to code in and isn't as flexible. And you know, doesn't have as many things built into it. You now have to add a bunch of third-party things in to replicate all the functionality you had in ColdFusion. So, and you know, we're here on the CF Live podcast. You know, we're also helping getting out the word that ColdFusion is a modern and live language. So, and not only modern and live, it's the most secure. I read it's the most secure web development platform out there. You know, people are always raving about Ruby on Rails or PHP or whatever, but they have more hacks, and way more hacks, you know, like 10 times more. So, you know, I think ColdFusion actually is doing a great job. In fact, I'm writing a book on why I think ColdFusion, you know, really is the best choice and the most alive language. So maybe I'll put some quotes from you in there, Mike.
You're more than welcome if you wish, you know, but that would be an honor, you know. And yeah, I mean, definitely. Let me say this: I started in ColdFusion in 1996. I'm still in it in 2018, and I'm not going anywhere else, and I'm not retiring, as I said earlier. I'm not giving up, you know, and there's still plenty of work for me going around. So you know, let's get real and, you know, get with the program, you know. Particularly, again, I want to emphasize this to anybody out there that isn't using CFML or ColdFusion. Take a look at what command box is doing. Like Michaela said, you can be up and running in the drop of a hat. Really, it's an amazing thing, and you know, you've got all this capability that's at your fingertips. So anyway, I went over the tangent to a certain extent there. I mean, certainly going back to blockchain, which is what, you know, one of the things this is about. It's not, you know, I can tell you this: it is hyped, but it's not going away. You know, I can tell you that because it does have real benefits. It's just that you know, one way or another, it's been seen as making a good deal of money, and is and has been, and you know, but there will be I believe there will be a shakeout. A lot of people talk about Bitcoin going away. Bitcoin's not going to go away because it works, you know. Because I'm actually now beginning to see it being taken by a lot more places. In fact, I'll touch on that if I may. One of the projects I'm working on, I'll name it. It's Earth Dollar. And it basically what it is a land asset-backed cryptocurrency. And they've had millions of hectares of land pledged to them by indigenous peoples around the world. So they do have assets backing them up, and it's land assets. And their goal is to bring some good ways of living back to the world. Get us away from the more sordid aspects of capitalism. But the reason I mentioned them is because they are in a grouping with Bitcoin is one of them. Litecoin, there's a few others. They're in a grouping and they're building a bridge between cryptocurrencies and what we call fiat currency, ordinary currency. So you won't have to go to exchanges anymore, and they'll be fluid. It'll be very fluid to use either cryptocurrency or fiat.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be in the smartphones of the future, there'll be some clever app that just works with thousands of currencies, and you just won't have to worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. You won't have to worry about it. It'd be
just like as I understand it, Google has like a translator thing. I think it's kind of still maybe a bit prototype, but basically you can real time translate between 50 or 100 different languages. So
yeah, I can tell you a little story on that, because I knew somebody who was working on that project. It's an AI project, artificial intelligence, and the day that they switched over from the typical way they were doing it to AI, and I've been through a lot of switchovers in my life, but anyway, they were nervous. But so it's now completely AI based. There's no human intervention as such in there. And yeah, you're right. It's amazing. Like you, I've got friends around and about who speak different languages, even different alphabets, and it's pretty. And that's another story. Certainly, the other project that I'm working on, which is called Digisphere Labs. That's in a more that's not the word. In ways a more important place, but it's a place that already exists. So they're in the biofuels business. But they're going to be their goal in life is to make biofuels from landfill waste, which just became a big deal because China stopped taking landfill waste from Europe and the USA and others. So that's going to be a big deal. So that's the other blockchain-based project I'm on. They're both exciting in their own ways. They're both revolutionary too. So. But yeah, blockchain won't go away. There'll be a bit already. I mean, I think I read the other day that there's about 1,200 cryptocurrencies that don't exist anymore. So that shakeout is already starting to happen.
Now, on both these projects, it sounds like the blockchain's being used in order to, keep track of which piece of land or which, whatever bucket full of trash, who did it come from, and where's it going, and so it's like a database of what's going on, but it's distributed, and you can't falsify it. Exactly.
Yeah, it's basically it'll be used on the second project. They just realised supply chain management and that sort of thing. So yeah, they're both, like I said,
really, if we open that idea up, Mike, really many projects that ColdFusion developers are working on, there could be a database aspect that might be better done in blockchain. If you had a real estate application where you wanted to record who, the chain of selling the house, currently that's all done in a centralized database at the county level.
Right.
But it could be done in a blockchain. Or you were saying supply chain management.
Yeah, it will be done. Just to take your point on real estate, it will be done in a blockchain. There's a company in town here in Eugene called IDX. I think it's IDX Broker. Anyway, they are like an aggregator of real estate agents in the United States, and the National Association of Realtors, which is an American grouping, are actually working on a blockchain project now for exactly that reason.
So really, for everyone listening, whatever industry you're in, whether it's real estate or pharmaceuticals or government or whatever, chances are your industry is going to be revolutionized by the blockchain changing how things are done, and possibly putting quite a few large corporations out of business if they don't change what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. And there's another revolution going on, which the DigiSphere project, I mean, is involved in. It's called in Industry 4.0. And that what's happening there is the Internet of Things, which has been around for quite a while, in fact, is now being embraced very heavily by industry. So we're going to have sensors on, on devices, on machines, and data. Blockchain will be used to collate and verify and maintain data from those. And then there's something else that people may want to look up, which is very interesting, something called digital twin. So what that means is that before a piece of machinery is built, it's built digitally. And then once it's been built digitally, then and verified, then the machine itself will be built. But then the digital version of it and the real version of it stay connected through the lifetime of that piece of equipment.
Mm. And you store that data in the blockchain so it couldn't be messed with,
right?
And it would be available to anyone who wanted to inspect it.
Yes, exactly. Which is a big deal as well, because you've got all these standards agencies that want to know, that you're not doing dangerous things and this, that, and the other, which is very important.
So you could have the certificate to say this machine is safe or whatever it is being certified for, actually put into the blockchain. So anyone, you wouldn't have to trust someone when you bought the machine secondhand. When you buy a car these days, you're not quite sure what the history is. I mean, they have those services out there that are supposed to tell you were there any accidents with the car and so on. But if that whole thing was in the blockchain, you could just tell where any car had been and what it had done.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. In fact, one of the sample projects that Hyperledger has out there is exactly that sort of an application that tracks the life of a car from the order point through to the delivery, through to the usage, through to the resale, all the things you just mentioned.
And you could even take that further back in time and further forward back in time by seeing where are all the components that made this car, where did they come from, and who made them, and were they, did they pass quality assurance? Okay. And, if there was like a lemon component in there, you'd be able to figure it out. Or, the whole recall process. Currently, when you have a recall on an automobile because there's a problem with one of the components, they like mail millions of letters out.
Exactly.
And you're supposed to, and it's up to you as the owner to go in. But if all that data was in the blockchain, you'd be able to, your car, if it had an AI in it, would say, oh yeah, I need to drive myself to the shop and get this component dealt with,
Yeah.
And then just to finish that thought on the other end, when the car has finished its useful life and is going to the wrecking yard, you could track all the components for those that could be reused or recycled. All of that could be tracked.
Absolutely. And I mean, to me, that's I'm altruistic to a certain extent, Michaela, and another reason I got very interested in blockchain is because I think it's a force for good, and cryptocurrency too. I mean, just to touch on that for a minute, because there's a lot of, drug dealers are using it. And I mean, drug dealers have been laundering money for bloody years, before cryptocurrency was even thought about.
I heard that drug dealers are quite able to use, banks to launder their money.
Exactly.
In fact, didn't HSBC get caught doing that a few years back? So and that was like far bigger than the whole size of the crypto market.
Absolutely, Michaela. And one other thing you just reminded me of, but it's a different subject. So you get this palaver, to use an English term, which means nonsense, sort of. You get this nonsense that if you put Bitcoin miners together, they're using the same amount of electricity or more electricity than Ireland. We'll say we need to set that aside like this. The bloody banks, the banking system is using immense amounts of energy too. It's not like Bitcoin is using all this energy and banks are using none. That's a classic piece of propaganda from the incumbent financial systems to try and discredit cryptocurrencies. Well, here's the good news: they're failing miserably. And just to touch on something else that you said, touched on earlier, and it's very important. There was an incident a few months ago where China, that most of the Bitcoin mining in the world was going on in China, and the government tried to crack down on it. Tried to crack down on the mining. So what happened is the majority of the miners moved from China to Canada. So and as we go forward, every time there's a country that tries to squash something to do with cryptocurrencies, there's several other, there's at least two countries who embrace it.
Yeah, I mean, some countries, like there are cantons in Switzerland that are definitely very pro crypto. I forget the name of the one that's famous. There's like a valley there where there's a lot of crypto.
Yeah, I can't remember the name, but you're right. Yeah.
And then, of course, the countries that have cheap electricity, I assume Canada has cheap electricity from hydroelectric.
Right,
projects.
hydro, exactly.
But, Iceland is also big into this, and they're big into privacy to start with. So, and, openness of data and what have you. So there's a lot of crypto that mining that happens there. And then I was recently in Georgia in the, I guess it's the Ural Mountains, or I don't know what the name of the mountains is there. But anyway, they have a lot of hydroelectric power.
Right.
And so there's a whole fintech thing there that's going on. It's amazing.
Well, interesting you should mention that part of the world, because one of the countries that's really embraced it, from top to bottom, you could say, is Estonia.
Mm-hmm. Right, with the whole e-residency and making the whole of government more automated and transparent.
Exactly. Yeah, they're very, in many ways too. It's a very. I've never been, but it sounds like a very interesting place. But yeah,
I saw their former CTO, like the CTO of the whole government, and he gave a talk at a conference I was at about their vision for how like citizens would be able to access any of their own data, but the stuff that was private, other people couldn't get to, and
right,
because it was kind of hardwired into your national ID, that kind of gave the private key to all that. So
yeah,
and in addition, they wanted to harden it against other countries doing, high cyber attacks on it. Because I don't know if it was Estonia. I think Estonia did have a cyber attack a few years ago, which supposedly came from Russia, because Russia got ticked off of them because they said something nasty about Russia. But they wanted this to be, with this distributed kind of technology, it's a lot harder to do a cyber attack.
Yeah, most definitely it's a lot harder. And, because there's a lot more, just simple stuff like there's a lot more cryptography baked into the system, And just to address that for a minute, because some people will come back at me and say, hang on a minute, Ethereum had over 30,000 smart contracts. The smart contract, incidentally, to go back to a point you made, is what helps to cut out a lot of middlemen. Because a smart contract allows you to negotiate a contract in software without having some, like a escrow type thing in the middle. But anyway, so people will often come back at me and say, but Ethereum just had a load of smart contracts compromised. The smart contract wasn't the problem. It was subpar development. The problem was a development problem, not a software development problem, not a smart contract problem. So it's an interesting time. When you put together machine learning and AI, you start to approach the place where software can write software. And the one thing about writing software, for those of us who've done it, what we create can be very exciting, but writing the software itself is bloody toil, trouble, boredom, and many other things. So it's not. For those who, I'm guessing everybody that's going to watch this will have written software, but for those who haven't written software, it's pretty arduous. So,
well, I think the interesting idea there is not only can you have AIs writing software they could be writing these smart contracts, and the next step after that is that they are doing the trading or the business. They're running the business on the smart contracts,
right?
And
exactly.
Because it's computer run, when humans do a business, it could take them days or months to do a new business business initiative.
Right.
Just think what it will be when a computer is doing that, and they can be in milliseconds or less. They can switch the whole thing and come up with a new strategy.
Well, exactly. And, anybody that's not to, to diss, as they say, any particular occupation, but anybody that's had to use attorneys for anything will know what the bills can get like.
Right. So if you have, and there already are AIs, I think they may be based on that IBM initiative.
Oh, the Watson.
The IBM Watson thing. Yeah. I think they came up with a spin-off of that does. They did one spin-off that does healthcare stuff, that does diagnosis, but I think they did a legal one. And anyway, I read a thing that said some big corporation, they had this legal thing do 300,000 hours of legal work. Can you imagine what that would have cost if you'd had it billed out by a lawyer?
Well, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, no, you're right. And, another place that AI and machine learning, big data is impacting is you just touched on it in a way, is medicine, because what's being discovered now is that AI can diagnose radiology images better than radiologists, more accurately. So, a lot's changing, and, there's lots of worries about what's going to happen with artificial intelligence. Is it going to put a lot of people out of work? Well, the answer is yes. But that's happened before, and we usually move on to do something else, which is, typically speaking, more pleasant. So I have great optimism about the future. And and if somebody designs an AI that can tune Java servers better than me, I'll take the hat off to them.
That might take quite a bit of machine learning there.
Well, it's not easy. I mean, even great products like Fusion Reactor, it's still, I mean, I can usually, and this is not a plug for me, I promise you, but I can usually diagnose something without either Fusion Reactor or CFusion. I don't need them, but they are great products to have. And but even then, there's still problems with Java servers. People still have problems with them, and there's a reason for it, and I'll state that reason now because it's important for people to know. So JVMs, Java Virtual Machines, can run on anything from a set-top box or even something smaller to in fact, I've seen people running ColdFusion on Raspberry Pis, for instance.
Yeah.
So a JVM, it comes out of Oracle, supposedly optimized to run either on I'll use that as an example, a Raspberry Pi, or these gigantic Java servers that run the financial systems of the world. And how can the JVM be tuned effectively for all those different environments? It can't, and it isn't. And it gets even more muddy because there are at least 3 or 4 different garbage collectors. There's serial, there's parallel, there's garbage first, there's concurrent mark suite. So not only have you got maybe 180 different arguments you can apply to a JVM, but you've got 4 or maybe 5 different garbage collectors. So how in heaven's name can you distribute a JVM or JDK that's set for its environment? The answer is you can't. It's impossible. So all JVMs need tuning, and the difference is remarkable.
Oh, it is amazing. It can go from really slow and frequently crashing multiple times a day to running flawlessly without having to bump up the memory.
Yeah, exactly.
On the server, because that's often what people do. They're like, oh, well, it's running out of memory and crashing. Let me just bump it up to 32 gigs of RAM. But that doesn't really solve the underlying issue.
Well, sometimes it makes it worse because there's more heap to inspect when it's a bigger heap. So I'm not saying it doesn't help, but it's not where I start. That's for certain. I look at what's going on. And this is a plug, I suppose, but just in case. Like I said, I'm going to repeat myself. Every JVM needs tuning, and I do offer a flat fee for tuning a JVM, which is on the CF Whisperer website. And I'm not the only one who's reasonable at doing that. Charlie Earhart is great too, and to another extent, although he doesn't do it all the time. Brad Wood at Otis, he's very good at doing it too.
Well, that is amazing about JVM tuning, and I'm sure there are going to be lots of advances with AI and other things in the future, but it might be quite a few years off because of the complexities. But let's move on now, Mike, to looking at blockchain versus the GDPR. And what is GDPR for anyone who hasn't heard from all the hype about that was back in May?
Yeah, well, the funny thing about that is not many people had heard about it before me. Or, I mean, obviously, as you and I both came from Europe, I have people there who told me about it. But GDPR stands for General Data Protection. I'm trying to think what
Regulation.
They are. Regulation, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yeah. So it actually started life a few years ago. May I think it was May 26th, 2018 is when it came into force. I'm sure a lot of people, just to give an example of what it caused, a lot of people that are going to watch this got loads of emails saying, this is about spurred on by GDPR, and basically, just to cut to the chase, what GDPR says is you as a human being or you as an entity own your own data. It is not data that can be used by anybody else for anything unless you give permission for it to be used like that. Another provision is if you go to a company and you say to them, "Have you got data on me?" and they say yes, you can say, "I want you to remove it," and prove to me that you removed it.
Or I'd like a copy of it to see what you have.
That's another, yeah, like a copy of it. So what that's done at the stroke of a pen, well, it's the stroke of many pens and keys and other such things, is really invalidated the business model of Google, Facebook, Twitter to a certain extent, and many others, because those companies exist on being able to use our data without our express knowledge for anything they want and to make money from it. And there was a ruling, in actual fact, that I think it was either today or yesterday. Google had just been fined $5 billion for things relating to GDPR. And the problem...
Can they pay that fine in Bitcoin? Or?
Well, that's a good question. I'll find out. I was going to say something about fiat currency earlier, but that's controversial, so I don't need to say it. But... yeah, so basically...
we don't have censorship on the CF Alive podcast, Mike, so feel free to say whatever you need to say. All
right, I'll just say this quickly. So let's say let's say that there's this body somewhere, maybe it's the Earth Council or some star or whatever, and they say, we want to bring in a value exchange system. We don't have one, and we want to make things a bit more fluid. So we're going to consider two possibilities. And you've got to present them, you too. So one comes in with fiat currency as a proposal, and the other comes in with cryptocurrency as a proposal. And the body looks at them and says, "Go away, fiat currency. You don't have any. There's no value. You don't have any. You're not backed by anything because most monies aren't nowadays. There's a lot of stories in that,
and it can be counterfeited.
Well, exactly. Yeah, it's so people who tell me, I touched on this before, people who say to me, I don't like cryptocurrency because it can be used by, we talked about this before, it can be used by drug dealers and it can be laundered. All that stuff, as we said, both of us, has been going on for years and still is with fiat currency. But so, eventually cryptocurrency will replace fiat currency. It's an inevitability. And, we're in a transition period at the moment. So, but anyway, I went off at another tangent there a little bit. So we were talking about GDPR. So one of the discussion points that came up around when people started to realise what GDPR is, and remember what I said a minute ago, that you have the right to as you said, Michaela, to get a copy of your data. You have a right to have your data removed if you request it. So let's look at what blockchain is. Blockchain is an immutable record where things can't be deleted. So what do we do there? We've got GDPR, which says you can have your data deleted if you request it, and blockchain is you can't delete your data. So the answer is something called self-sovereign identity. And in that, it's sort of a quasi-blockchain where you retain your data. Your data is with you, and you, via blockchain, share it as you wish when requested. And you only share what you want to share. You don't share everything. And a good example of that is, I like to drink beer, but I don't look 18 or 21 anymore. But when I did, I had to show my driver's license. So what does my driver's license show? Here, anyway, it shows your date of birth. It shows, which is what they're looking for. It shows where you live. It shows whether you want to be an organ donor. The idea behind self-sovereign identity is you only share what is required. You don't share anything else.
So it would be like you had a permanent marker and you'd covered up the bits of your driver's license, like your date of birth that you didn't want to reveal, or your address or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
When you handed it over.
Yeah. So yes. Sorry.
And then it is an example of this, that doc.io, social service that's out there where you put all your data into them and then they share it out to other platforms with your permission.
Well, yeah, with your permission, that's the thing. And the other thing that self-sovereign identity gives us the ability to do is we profit from our data. We personally can profit from our data if we decide to share it and get compensated as a result. So you can imagine what's going on in, as we speak, you could say, in the likes of Google and Facebook and so on. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they say. What I mean by that is, if they say to you, it's invalid for them to say to you, we have the right to use your data if you don't check this box. That's not valid anymore. It's not a good enough, choice. So when GDPR only kicked in just over a month ago, let's remember. So there's going to be a lot of knock-on effects. And for the likes of, I'll mention them again, Google and Facebook and so on, the only chance they can only do two things. They can either comply with it or not comply with it. If they don't, they'll get fined, and the fines are big. And the only way they can comply with it is to change the whole mechanism, or have two completely different code bases, one for GDPR and one for non-GDPR. And another thing that's really important about GDPR, it doesn't just apply to European companies. It applies to any company that retains data on a European entity, wherever they may be. So it's basically, it's in essence a worldwide regulation in many ways that will spread and will bring benefits, and other things going to bring benefits to us. So if you want to look at, there's two entities. If you want to look at this self-sovereign identity, there's an entity called Sovereign, but it's spelled SOVRIN. And within Hyperledger, there's a project called Indy, INDY, like the Indy 500. And either of those two projects refers to self-sovereign identity, and that's going to be a very, very important need going forward. So it's worth investigating. So that's the GDPR bit, and and I'll repeat myself again. Come back a little bit to ColdFusion. ColdFusion has an incredible opportunity to be, whatever we want to call it, the intermediary, the glue, whatever it is, between blockchain and the distributed ledger technologies and standard or legacy data. I just got a thing, by the way. It's funny how things happen when we're doing things. And I get Bitcoin news because I find it to be quite an objective, bellwether of what's going on. And it says here, number of DLT companies explodes. So, as I said several times during this, and that doesn't mean TNT. In other words, DLT blockchains, I mean, it's growing so fast. For any developers wanting to look at something else, it's worth looking at. And like I said, don't be frightened, because it's not a complete new language. It's not the language most of the time that's different. It's the almost like the protocol. That'd be a good word for it. It's a protocol of how data's moved around and managed that's different.
So yeah, I think I'd second that. That ColdFusion is, ColdFusion's the best digital glue out there. That glues together different APIs, different databases, different projects, and Perhaps fortunately that it wasn't bought out by Microsoft, who I'm sure would have done amazing and great things with it, but it wouldn't have been so open to like working with Oracle or working with other people's APIs, right. I think. So,
well, the business case may not have been there.
Yeah. So let's wrap up by just talking about why you're proud to use ColdFusion after all these years of using it.
Well, it's a pragmatic reason, really. I live in a nice little 2-bedroom cottage in Eugene. I practice permaculture. I have a lovely life, and that's all thanks to ColdFusion. ColdFusion literally changed my life. I mean, again, I wrote about it. It literally changed my life totally. It's what got me. I mean, I wasn't in computer. I'm not a computer, science person at all. I was a business manager who had a need. And I found ColdFusion, or perhaps ColdFusion found me. So, for that reason, and it's still, again, I repeat another thing. At any one time, I have at least 6 or 7 clients. So ColdFusion, I hate to use these words because they're ridiculous. ColdFusion is not dead or dying; it's alive and kicking. And as you've said many times, and you've found, it's getting more so. I mean, when you've got a company like Adobe backing it, Adobe is not a philanthropic organization, They make money and they do a good job, and that's why they're still supporting ColdFusion.
Well, I was talking to Tribid Roy Chowdhury, the GM of ColdFusion and the other products that are under him, and he was saying that the sales year on year are increasing. So. It's more than it's not going away, it's actually growing. Exactly. And then of course, if you're not into the paid version of ColdFusion, there's the open source Lucy ColdFusion. So all those people who used to complain that, oh well, ASP is free and ColdFusion you have to pay for the server license, there's an option now if you're into open source to have a totally open source stack with ColdFusion in it.
Absolutely, and I'll address one more other thing in that, to your point there. The most expensive, and I'll emphasize that, the most expensive cost in any IT software project is labor. So the longer it takes to do something, the more costly what we're talking, maybe, I don't know, $1,500 to buy a standard version of ColdFusion. $1,500 is gone in a couple of days. If something takes longer, so that to me is a disingenuous argument, that it's, and again, people are still buying it. I mean, why are people, not only are Adobe supporting it, people are buying it.
Well, why do people buy any tool instead of trying to make it themselves or doing it by hand, because it saves time and money.
Exactly.
And it's probably more safe as well in the case of web languages, more secure.
Yeah.
You could roll it yourself or use some other language, but the most secure language out there is ColdFusion.
Yeah, definitely. And, that's very important, always. So, I mean, I don't know whether I answered your question well there, but that's...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's just take this a step further and ask, what would it take to make ColdFusion even more alive this year?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, it's. I mean, probably a better. I'll go on the other foot here about Adobe. One thing that I think they probably don't do as well as they could is supporting communities, developer communities. We used to have the user groups that were most of them much more active than they are today. The other thing that I think really did catapult ColdFusion to where it got to is having sample apps, having a good deal of sample apps out there. That was really great for me because it helped me to learn a lot. And that's why I like that.
I thought they don't still have sample apps. I thought I saw those are still out there, but maybe they're hidden away somewhere.
Right. Well, maybe they're hidden away somewhere. I haven't come across them. So that if they're there, that's great. Because that's a really important thing to have. It like I said about Hyperledger, there are sample apps you can download for free.
And you know, one of the new things they're not really sample apps, but they're more like modules. But the whole ForgeBox thing, where you can just download some code to do some functionality that someone else wrote,
Yeah.
And just plug it into your application. So that's another cool initiative. That's another one from Altis Solutions.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Exactly. Which is,
but it's open to everyone. So.
Yeah. 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 No. Well, I met Lewis before, just about the time that he was starting to do Coldbox. And the one thing that blew my mind at that time, and it's a great lesson for all of us, is, and you and I were involved in other frameworks, as you know, Fusebox being one. But the thing about Coldbox is that Lewis started with documentation and then followed it up with code, not the other way around. And the reason that Coldbox and all the other box products have done so well, in my opinion, is because he worked his heart out producing good documentation on his own. Yeah,
that's definitely a good approach for creating software, to create the documentation and the tests as well,
right,
prior to creating
exactly.
the code.
Yeah, the tests are important.
Let me just ask a final question here, because I know you spoke at CF Summit in Las Vegas last year, and I believe you're speaking this year. I think I saw the speakers announced, and I'm pretty sure I saw your photo up there.
Yeah, the photos there, yeah.
Yeah, so tell us what you enjoyed at CF Summit last year, and why you think a CFer should go to that.
Well, I think, what I enjoyed about it, and I've been to all of them, and what I enjoyed about all of them is I kept seeing different faces every year, people I'd never met before, which, considering I'm a CF great-grandfather, is, literally, is quite something. I think that every year there are different faces, like I said, and it's really uplifting. And, I spoke to a lot of people last year who'd never been to a ColdFusion event before, and then just meeting. I mean, what I would say is there's been three phases of engineering teams in ColdFusion. There was the original team, which was the Light team, who were great pioneers. Then there's another team that often gets left by the wayside, which shouldn't, which was the Macromedia team, and the man who was spearheading that was just Sean Caulfield. And Sean actually and his team rescued ColdFusion, because when ColdFusion went from 5 to 6 version, that's when it went to Java, and the original version, ColdFusion MX6, was a bloody disaster. So Sean and his team basically rewrote it from the ground up. And 6.1 was a different version, and the rest is history. So that was a great team. And then the current team, which is largely based out of India, such absolutely great people, and you get to meet them if you go to the events. And and Alicia, mustn't forget Alicia, because she's been a stalwart and a supporter of ColdFusion. I don't know whether I'm right on this, and maybe she'll hear this and put me right, but I think her father was, or one of her relatives was John Dvorak, who
No,
okay, thanks.
I asked her that one myself, because there's a whole there was the Dvorak fortune,
right?
Or maybe I'm confused. You're thinking of John Dvorak, the author and journalist?
Yeah, exactly. That's what
well,
I'm thinking of.
Maybe they are related. I was thinking of the guy who invented the keyboard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So yeah, I'll have to ask her that next time I have her on the show, or ask her in Las Vegas.
Well, he was, just for the sake of it, anybody that did get to read, anybody that didn't, I should say, get to read him or listen to him, he was great. He was, a cut above most of the other writers and speakers at that time, I think. Yeah.
Great. Well, sounds exciting. So I'll look forward to seeing you at CF Summit in Las Vegas. I think it's October 1st to 3rd this year.
Right.
It's usually in the October timeframe. And if folks want to find you online, what are the best ways to do that, Mike?
So CF Whisperer blog has been around for a while. I started a blog specifically aimed at JVM and Java projects, which is called Java Mem. That's mem like memory. So Java Mem. And that's, is totally devoted to Java. Those articles tend to be a bit more entertaining to look at. There's more graphics in them and so on. CF Whisperer is much more text based. But you know what's interesting about both of them? I've had a couple of hiccups, but the hiccups of them not being there, anyway, the point is when they work bloody quick. Because I've always thought if I'm going out there touting tuning and load balance, load testing and so on, I want my own site to work quick. So I put a lot of effort into that.
Well, great. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast today, Mike.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Thank you very much for inviting me again. I really appreciate it.